Hey everyone, this is Oslin coming in with another video tutorial for the Stonevault. This will cover the Mythic mechanics for Season 1 of The War Within. The corridor to the first boss is pretty straightforward. The tank may want to target multiple groups, so focus down the ghastly Void Souls, interrupting their howling fear, and maintain a 6-yard distance from the player being targeted by pulverizing pounce, if you have a cast or channel in progress, as this will knock you back. Tanks will also want to keep the earth-infused golems faced away from the party so that other players aren't struck by Seismic Wave. Melee should also be aware of this ability as well. Your first boss encounter is with E.D.N.A, whose core mechanic is Volatile Spike. This ability creates spikes beneath 3 random players. If a player comes into contact with a spike, it will explode, dealing significant area of effect damage within a 4-yard radius. To destroy these spikes, you'll use Refracting Beam, an ability that E.D.N.A casts after volatile spikes. During its cast, an arrow will follow each player. Position yourselves so that these arrows align with the remaining spikes to target and destroy them. Meanwhile, other players should avoid standing directly in front of or behind another player to prevent taking additional damage. If the spikes aren't destroyed, they will empower E.D.N.A's ultimate attack, Earthshatterer. This attack not only destroys all the spikes in the room, but also deals party-wide damage for each volatile spike that remains. The tank buster in this fight is called Seismic Smash. Healers should ensure the tank is at full health before this hits, and tanks should have damage mitigation abilities ready. After Seismic Smash strikes, it applies a debuff called Seismic Reverberation to the tank. While it might seem wise to dispel this debuff immediately, it's actually more beneficial to wait. Dispel it just before the next Seismic Smash, as doing so grants the tank a 6-second damage reduction buff called Stone Shield. After defeating E.D.N.A, you have 2 options: proceed to the Forge Speakers or Skarmorak. We're going to head west towards the Forge Speakers. As you navigate this corridor, be aware of the following enemy abilities. The repurposed loader bot's Pulverizing Pounce targets a random player, causing a knockback to them and any players within a 6-yard radius. The Forge-bound Menders should be prioritized as they cast Restoring Metals on a nearby ally, healing them for 40% of their health. The Engine Speaker's Concussive Smash slows their target by 20% while the effect is being channeled. The Forge Loader's Lava Cannon faces a specific direction and fires a large bolt of molten lava, dealing significant damage and applying a 10-second bleed effect to anyone it hits. Lastly, the Aspiring Forge Hand's Mutilate is a passive ability that occasionally applies a stacking debuff on their target, increasing the damage they take by 5% for 8 seconds. You're about to face the most challenging encounter in the Stonevault, which hinges largely on each player's positioning. No one should stand in the center of the room because Speaker Brock will cast Swan Song, sending a massive cube hurling straight down the middle. Much like the Forge Loaders from the corridor, Forge Speaker Dorlita will also fire a lava cannon in the same manner, so be sure to avoid that as well. Speaker Brock will frequently cast Molten Metal, which damages and slows all targets by 20%, unless interrupted. This can become overwhelming if not managed properly. Melee players should interrupt when Brock is in range near the tank, while ranged players need to be prepared to interrupt when he's up on the ledge during Swan Song. The tank buster in this encounter is Dorlita's Igneous Hammer, so tanks should save their damage mitigation abilities for this attack, and healers should be ready to keep the tank's health topped off. At the start of the encounter, you may have noticed that fighting where the bosses stand upon entering the room is generally safe. However, when Speaker Brock casts Swan Song, remaining in that spot becomes risky due to Dorlita's Magma Wave. This ability sends 4 massive waves of lava flooding the room, and the only safe spot will be on top of the inactive vent. Healers will need to keep the group healthy during this time, as everyone will be taking incremental damage while the vents are active. On Mythic difficulty, the Magma Wave will be triggered when Dorlita destroys the cube with Blazing Crescendo, and can get even more dicey as the floor fills up with lava pools, as Magma Wave will send 4 waves of lava gushing towards the other safe zones. You only want to stand on the inactive vent while the others are active, to avoid a surprise ignition later in the encounter. You'll also want to move the boss between cube pulls, positioning onto the vent when you're confident it won't erupt beneath your feet. Lastly, just be sure that Brock and Orlita both die within relatively close timing of one another to avoid triggering their enrage. Moving down the eastern corridor, here are the enemies and abilities to be mindful of. Void-bound Howlers cast Piercing Wail. These will deal significant damage if not interrupted, and apply a debuff that increases the damage taken from the next Piercing Wail by 25%. Turn Speakers will cast Censoring Gear, inflicting damage to that player and silencing them for 3 seconds. Void-touched Elementals will cast Crystal Salvo, creating a number of swirlies on the ground that need to be avoided. And lastly, Void-bound Despoilers can have their Shadow Claw interrupted, but the AoE damage from Void Outbursts can only be avoided when non-tank targets increase their distance from the enemy. Skarmorak is the second or third boss you'll encounter depending on your chosen route. His main mechanic is Crystalline Smash, which spawns 3 crystal shards. These shards deal significant shadow damage to the entire party while they're active, and explode upon destruction, causing additional shadow damage. It's crucial to destroy the crystal shards before Skarmorak casts Fortified Shield when his energy reaches 0. Any remaining shards will strengthen the shield around him, making it harder to break. Be cautious not to destroy all the shards simultaneously, as their explosions can overlap and inflict excessive damage on the party. Another key ability is Unstable Crash, which inflicts heavy shadow damage to players within a 15-yard radius, and ejects several unstable fragments onto the battlefield. All players should move out of the impact area to avoid the initial damage. Afterward, each player should pick up 1 unstable fragment. Collecting a fragment increases your healing received and the damage you deal to the fortified shell by 50% for 30 seconds, but it also adds a stacking unstable energy effect that causes ticking damage over time. If extra fragments remain, it's safe to pick up 1 or 2 more, but be mindful that each additional fragment increases the ticking damage, putting more strain on your healer. During the fortified shell phase, Skarmorak becomes immobile and stops attacking directly. He repeatedly casts Void Discharge, dealing stacking shadow damage to all players. To stop Void Discharge, focus on breaking the fortified shell as quickly as possible. Prioritize damage on the shield to minimize the stacking damage to the party. After defeating the Forge Speakers in Skarmorak, the final corridor will open. Here are the enemies and abilities that you need to be mindful of. First, Cursed Forged Menders will cast Restoring Metal if not interrupted, healing an ally for 40% of their health. Make it a priority to interrupt this spell to prevent them from prolonging the fight. Next, the Cursed Forged Honor Guards possess an ability called Shield Stampede. They will face a direction for 5 seconds before charging at their target, dealing damage and stunning anyone they hit for 2 seconds. Be prepared to dodge their charge to avoid unnecessary damage and stuns. Lastly, Rock Smashers should be prioritized while interrupting Menders as needed. Rock Smashers have an ability called Smashed, which deals significant nature damage to all players within a 60-yard radius, knocks them back, and applies a debuff that increases the damage of the next Smashed by 10%. Your tank may choose to handle 2 of these in the final room, so focus on defeating them quickly to minimize group damage. Void Speaker Eirich is the final boss of the Stonevault. As you enter his chamber, you'll notice 2 void rifts at the back of the room. Be extremely cautious. Touching either of these rifts will kill you instantly. Throughout the fight, Eirich will repeatedly cast an ability called Void Corruption, which inflicts moderate shadow damage every 3 seconds. This damage increases by 25% the longer the effect remains active. To remove the Void Corruption, players will need to step into the vacuum near a Void Rift without actually touching it. Once a Void Rift has been used in this way, it will respawn in a new random location, meaning only one player can use the same rift at a time. Players will want to coordinate the removal of this corruption so that multiple players aren't running towards the same rift simultaneously. The third ability to be aware of is Entropic Reckoning. Eirich will spawn circles beneath each player which leave behind shadow pools. These pools persist on the ground, so it's important for players to coordinate where they drop them, ideally at the edges of the room, to keep the central area clear for movement.